So my name is Susan Scott, and I founded these webinars in 2020 with the amazing team at Awakening Spirituality and the Lana and Vicky, who are here tonight, also Lori Sebastianuti and Linda Trin, and we'll talk about later. And I want to acknowledge that deep gratitude for being on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples that is in the Haldimand Tract, where I am in the Great Lakes region of Ontario. And if you know the territories, the traditional territories where you're based, and you would like to acknowledge that, just enter them into chat. That way we have our gratitude expressed, we're grounded, we're together on Turtle Island, and we're in a good place. The life writing webinars have been going on since 2020. We developed them because we feel really strongly in as much as life writing is an integrative art for uniting memory and experience. Spiritual life writing invites the whole self in. Memory and experience, fact, feeling, and imagination, the profane and the sacred. So we offer these sessions to help you find your authentic voice and shed whatever fears make you hold your tongue. This is our third of 4 masterclasses in 2023. And you can find on the Awakening Spirituality website recordings from that Lori Sebastianuti did with Natalie Welsh on music and spiritual life writing, Vicky MacArthur's on mysticism and memoir that revolves around her beautiful memoir, A Lotus on Fire. This one is the third one with Lana Cullis and Seth Shooter. And in November, we will wrap up with Linda Trin on faith and writing for children. So we're really grateful to have you here and very excited about tonight. So it's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Lana Cullis. Lana is part of the core team here with the spiritual life writing. She draws on waking dreams, voices, and visions that reveal the tender places where human truth, individuality, and courage intersect. You can find Lana Cullis in the Globe and Mail, Powell River Peak, Catholic Living Magazine, and on the 2022 Federation of BC Writers Literary Long List. Lana lives, writes, and plays in the Catholic region on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, and she's indispensable to this work. And tonight you'll get a peek at why I say that. Lana, over to you.
There, can we hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's thank you for that beautiful introduction, Susan. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to be here and to see how these series have evolved. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Seth L. Shooter. She is a filmmaker. She's a writer. She's a storyteller. She's a stand-up comic. And she is a person who has been living with rheumatoid arthritis and some other interesting health issues and writing anyways. And I had the good fortune to meet Seth in a writing program that I took, and that we both belong to the community, and it's called Writerly Love, and Vicky will put something in the chat about that later. But Seth came back and saw the new students in that program, and we had a Q&A like, how in the heck did you get yourself published, and when you're dealing with symptoms and all of that kinds of things. And so yeah, I'm Vicky will shortly put your full bio into the chat set, but I think the most important thing for us to know tonight is that you're a writer. You live with chronic conditions, you do it anyways, and you really like it, and you want to share about it. Yeah?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. Me too. And just before we started, Seth and I were just noting the fact that currently she's on the east coast of Canada, looking out her window from her writing desk to the ocean. And I am on the west coast of Canada, looking out my window at the ocean. So it's kind of neat to have those bookends with geography. So Seth, we're just going to kind of have a bit of a conversation here, and there's a couple of questions that I want to make sure that we answer. So I'm going to go with one of them first and just say, which came first, writing or illness? And can you tell us a little bit about the origins of those two things for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So writing came first. I was a young child I was an only child. And so I used my imagination quite a bit because I grew up kind of outside of the outskirts of my hometown and spent a lot of time alone. So I would write little sketches about my elementary school friends and, my teachers and things like that. And then when I kind of grew up, I started to write horror stories, like little short stories to kind of spook out my friends, because that was what I thought fun was scaring my friends. And, when I was a young adult, I thought perhaps I might be a Second City comedian, or I might write horror movies. So writing has kind of always been a part of me. I felt drawn to it. I've kind of heard the calling for it. It doesn't leave me alone. And so I guess I'm kind of lucky that when chronic illness kind of hijacked my life, and it did quite abruptly hijack my life, that I had the desire to write installed in me, so to speak. So it wasn't right away, because with rheumatoid arthritis, it primarily affects your hands. So all of a sudden, I kind of went from a 28-year-old woman who was running after her dreams and maybe getting a taste of what success might feel like, getting a little bit financially stable, finding my way in an industry that takes people years to get into, and then kind of just one day you wake up and your life is different. And so it was my hands, very inflamed and very painful to do just about anything. And so for a long time, I didn't think that I would be able to write, because I like to write with a pen and paper. And so it was a situation where I first started writing about how I was afraid I wouldn't be able to write anymore. And I dictated that, because dictation exists now, which is lovely. But I was terrified that my disease progression would mean I wouldn't be able to hold a pen like I am right now. So yeah, they kind of just converged together, and it was a coping mechanism for me that kind of felt very natural.
It's so awesome to hear, though, you speak about that thread of wanting to write from a very young child, and that even though it took some detours, that you got there, and now that's predominantly what you identify as a writer.
Yes, and I mean it looks different. As a child, you have wide eyes and you have no idea what anything actually means, or the systems behind it, or even what real motivations are as an adult. But then when you kind of get there, the tools are consistent, regardless of the genre, or, if you're screenwriting versus writing essays or trying to write horror stories. It's kind of the same process. It's just a little bit different details.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're really interested in tonight, and hearing from you, and then when we open up the conversation to more people after the writing exercises, is how has writing contributed to your wellness, or maybe even symptom relief? And how has writing potentially hindered those things or contributed to ill health?
Yes. Isn't that interesting? I know. And it really is both. I find that I've had experiences where writing has been very healing and writing has been very detrimental. So when I was doing my MFA, we talked about, with memoir, engaging with something too close to after the fact, when you're not quite out of the story yet. And I wouldn't say that that's something that I did with my illness writing, but I wrote about traumatic events in my childhood into a novel. And I did that before I had any kind of before I went into my MFA, before I'd really published very much. And I didn't have the tools to understand self-care and boundaries. And so I'm a very visual writer, and I can remember things visually. And I'm also triggered by scents and by, movies or images or all kinds of textures. And so I just went full steam ahead into looking into the relics of my childhood, you know, touching the teddy bears, reading the books, putting in the horror videotapes that I had watched as a kid to try and trigger memories to put myself into a scene. And I think I made myself quite sick by doing that. Now I would never tell anybody to do such a thing unless you have self-care, some sort of self-care regimen, whether it's your friends that you check in on or you're timed. And what I did later, which is kind of what I have done recently with my essays and with the book that I'm now querying, is I have a counselor that has to do with these, you know, types of writing that I do with my personal essays, with my memoir, where it's very personal. I have somebody that is specifically working with me to make sure that self-care is there, even when there is a part of me that might want to chase after something because I finally remember it and I need to put it down, or I have an epiphany and I really understand this from the perspective that I've been waiting for, that, you know, that final piece of the puzzle that just makes sense finally, but you need to take time because you've been in it for days or you've been in it for hours. And so I really think it can be healing or it can be harmful. And I'm grateful that I now understand what I need to do to keep myself grounded so that I can write about difficult things that are often very traumatizing.
It's so valuable that you're pointing out these things about taking care of ourselves. I like you, when I started writing, it was those stories that had the most energy for me. And so I wrote some pretty sad stories, and I used them to practice craft, like with the, you know, with initial encouragement, actually from Susan Scott and Vicky MacArthur here. But what I realize now is it almost feels like I need to have an exorcism of those old voices or, you know, parental voices or whatever that are in there. And then so I can get down to what I really want to write about, which I'm sort of figuring that out. Is that similar to you? Like, have you ever had that?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's interesting because trauma and bad things or challenging things don't just happen in a vacuum. You don't get one and you're done. It's a consistent kind of thing. And especially when you're chronically ill, you never know what is around the corner, whether it's, you know, a doctor that might not believe you. It could be medication and side effects. It could be a brand new symptom or a brand new illness that comes about because of other things. And I find writing about it and passionately blasting it out is really helpful. But I find any more than engaging with that, trying to touch that right then and there is something that I have to avoid, if that makes sense. I hope that's on the same realm of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So
right.
As a more mature writer now, you're not only monitoring what you talk about, but how much you talk about it, how much you stay with that topic without some kind of.
Yes. And the impact too. I think about that even more, you know. And when I was a younger person, because I feel like the first 2 years of a chronically ill person's new life, so with a post-diagnosis or post-symptoms, when they're trying to figure out what this diagnosis means, you know, grieving what they've lost or what they've perceived that they've lost, the future that they may have lost, all of these things. Excuse me, I'm losing my train of thought because the sun is setting in front of me and it's beautiful.
That's okay. I can ask you a different question.
No, but yeah, actually you could go ahead with that because my tangent would have lasted way too long. Sorry, everybody.
That's okay. We kind of jump around a bit here where, you know, we try to keep it, you know, fairly casual and reasonable.
Yeah, no, it's more, it's come back to me. This is what happens when you have estrogen deprivation at 28 years old, everybody. You're not supposed to have that. That's what happens, is it messes with your memory. So yeah, essentially what I was trying to say is engaging with those things is really great. Maybe that's a journalistic kind of thing where I put it in my journal, or maybe I put that on stage. Sometimes I go on stage and do storytelling and that kind of thing. And that can be really helpful for me as well. It's part of the healing aspect of it, where not everything has to be published. Not everything has to be looked at more than once when you just blast it out. And in those 2 years, I found that that's what I was doing. I was blasting it out. I was blasting it out. And It was only after a little bit of time of getting to know the doctors that I could trust, getting to know the medications and what they meant for me, trying different things and realizing that all is not necessarily lost, was I able to dig a little bit deeper. And so I would say to anybody who's newly chronically ill that after a year or two, the dust starts to settle. And that's when I think the deeper work in terms of processing chronic illness, living with chronic illness, and what could be done in the box that you're put in with chronic illness kind of comes out. There we go. I remembered.
Oh, there's a lot there. I'm sure I'm going to be wanting to watch the replays when we post them up, just to get into some more of the subtleties of what you said. What we're going to do now is we're going to pause our fabulous conversation. And we're going to do our first writing exercise. And so hopefully people brought a pen or a paper or a tablet or whatever. And Susan is going to put up a slideshow a slide that has the exercise on it for us. And what we're going to the purpose of this exercise is to kind of help you just get some words out there and maybe categorize them a little bit. And then we'll move into a second conversation with Seth and then another writing exercise. So are you able to screen share, my friends? Vicki or Susan?
Yeah, just hang on a sec.
Okay, no problem. Just making sure.
And just so everybody knows, oops, if you can see this or not, close that. So hang on, Lana, I'll just go back. So anybody who's viewing this after the fact, here's just the overall slide about the introduction to the session. If people are wanting to do their own land acknowledgement to get grounded, here's a slide for that as a reminder. This is just a reminder that there are resources coming that are very exciting, and Lana's email address is here. And then this takes us, Lana, to you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, and we'll talk more about the comprehensive list of resources that we have and how you might want to even add to them. So we're going to take 5 minutes, and we're going to do it in 1 minute chunks. And we kind of call that a writing sprint. So the first thing that we'll be writing about, and actually I'm just going to time us. I'm going to time us and give you the titles as we go. So the first thing that we're going to be writing about for 1 minute is your hopes as they relate to chronic conditions. So just brainstorm them. So we're going for 1 minute. And if you don't have a pen or a paper or a writing device, just meditate on that a little bit. Just think about that. Ten seconds left. So allow yourself to kind of just be okay that maybe you didn't finish your list, because you'll have, time after the series today. You can do that at another time. So the second thing that we're going to do a sprint about is your fears as they relate to writing with chronic conditions. And again, we'll do 1 minute on that. And about 10 seconds. So the next one that we're going to do is to be thinking about or listing the practical time or system barriers to your writing with a chronic condition. So just as an example, Seth gave us the example that in the beginning, her hands, the pain and the inflammation in her hands made it impossible for her to hold a pen or a pencil. So that's one barrier. So for yourself, could be totally different things, but just take the minute and list what you think might be the barriers to you being able to write in chronic conditions. And we'll do a minute. So this one's going to be a fast minute because I'm aware of time and I really want to have more time to chat with Seth. So we're going to pause number 3 and we're going to go to number 4 and I'm going to give us 30 seconds for that. And again, this is something, this exercise that you can continue after the session's over or come back to. So the fourth thing is, what are practices or activities that may have been helpful so far to your writing with chronic conditions? So we'll take 30 seconds. And about 10 more seconds. So, because we have the capacity to go back and do this in a recording, I'm going to save the other items, but just give you the Coles Notes version, which is, you know, when we're up against something that's difficult, if we chunk it into small pieces and then address one chunk at a time, it can be very powerful, whether it relates to your writing or whether it relates to your healing. And so at another time, just pick one item from any of the items on your list and brainstorm about that item. And then the next step would be, okay, pick one thing that you brainstormed about that one item and start to think about how you could do that in the coming week. And so I'm gonna have us go back to our conversation with Seth. And I gotta find my questions. There we go. So I understand that you've been a stand-up comic and maybe still consider yourself one. That's comedy is something that I went to first when I was dealing with some challenging health conditions. How has comedy or humor figured into this task of writing?
I think I've been writing comedy. I think that's the first thing I ever wrote. I mean, comedy for a kindergartner, but I tried to be funny. And I mean, life is just hilarious to me. And so it's impossible to not make fun of it or make fun of myself or make fun of how bad my biology is or make fun of how ridiculous our world is. There's just so much material. It's impossible for me not to touch it. So it's been a coping mechanism for me since I was a little girl, you know. When you're an only child, you attention seek. And the best way to get attention from your teachers in an overcrowded classroom is to make them laugh. And I kind of translate that over to my doctors as well. We have kind of a rundown healthcare system. And as much as many of them are wonderful and try, they're up against budget cuts and all kinds of difficult things. And so I just try to make everybody laugh. So, because if I'm in the situation, I could doom and gloom about it. or I could make jokes and relieve the tension of the situation. You know, I'm sick and I'm looking for help, and this doctor is trying to help me, and the medications they're prescribing might not be lovely or pleasant in any way. So got to find some humor somewhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I find it even, I sometimes I like the comedy that comes out of the everyday interactions of just the minutiae of life instead of going on stage and having to deliver lines. It's almost more improv, and I enjoy that, where I can connect with people that maybe in a healthcare situation are getting yelled at a lot. Last time I was in the ER, people were yelling at a lot of people. But then I made my doctor laugh as he was putting like an ECG sticky all over me. So, you know, it's just easier. It's just easier instead of scowling. And I mean, I had to go through years and years of being terrified and upset and bitter. But, you know, the comedy then was just angry, bitter comedy. It just, there's, yeah, you know, what can
Had
I say?
a little bit more venom than medicine in it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, when I was a younger creature, I definitely had more venomous humor. Now I'm just grateful to be here after being through so many different ailments. And you know, when you think you're going to die, and you know, you think that your life is forever changed, and your life is forever changed, it should change your perspective, and I'm grateful that mine did. So I try to I steer away from the more acidic humor.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's tough sometimes when the doctor doesn't believe you. But otherwise, you know.
Yeah, or you have like diagnostic instruments in places that they have no business being.
Yes.
Yeah,
But those are the best jokes. You can make the best jokes.
exactly. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the article that was in Chatelaine magazine.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I can. We could do hours on this.
In about 2 minutes, because then we want to do your writing exercise.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So just so you have
So
context.
yeah, my Chatelaine article, I mean, it was a year-long process to get a drug that I wanted to try for hair loss. Hair loss is a side effect of every ailment I have and just about every medication I have. And like most people, I want to keep my hair on my head. I'm a performer. Self-esteem is tied in there. Say what you will about vanity, but I like having hair. Okay. It's just what it is. And so I went to my doctor to get a prescription for a drug that they give out like candy to men, and he denied me. And he said, I don't prescribe this to women. And so I tried to make an argument. I tried to show him that there was no way that I was having children. It didn't matter. The science didn't matter. The research didn't matter. He doesn't do it. Okay. So I go to another doctor and I get the same spiel. And it takes me a year of going through these appointments and waiting for them while my hair is falling out and I'm losing my mind. And I finally convinced my nurse practitioner, who's a woman, to consider it. Like I brought my partner in and I was like, hey, he's here. We're not having kids. You know, please, like, this is what I really want to do. I want to try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I know the risks, etc. And she finally gave me the drug, and you know, it works to the degree that is helpful to me, which is lovely. But I suffered for a year because somebody just didn't want to do any research, had 5 minutes and was like, no, I don't do this. I don't care that you have a complex case. I get it. I'm a zebra. I have to plead my case everywhere I go. But I was just denied. And more women, I would go online and find other women that were like, I'm also being denied for this. I don't want kids, or I can't have kids, and I can't get this drug, and I want to try it, and it's proven to work in some women. So I wrote this essay about my experience because I was just infuriated with the entire situation. And hair loss is a time-sensitive thing, like a lot of illnesses. And it isn't fatal, but any research that you look at says that it's devastating to people's self-esteem. It can cause things like depression. It can ruin people's relationships because they're constantly festering over something that may or may not be able to be treated. And it's linked to their identity. And so I wrote the Chatelaine article because women get denied medication all the time. And it's not just a hair loss drug. It's all kinds of other different drugs, and their bodies are more regulated because of the uterus that they carry and the fertile potential that comes with that. And I understand, culturally in different places, there's different opinions on that. But where I am in Canada, we're trying to have equality and we try not to discriminate against women. And medical discrimination is very real for women and women of color and non-binary people and trans people. And, I wanted gender affirming care just like other people, and I had to fight to get it. And I had to tell the world, and Chatelaine was kind enough to allow me to tell their readers.
That is so awesome. And so I'm hearing this thread, as a child, you wanted to write, you thought of all kinds of different things to write about. And then, you ended up with this illness, and then you were writing for, self-soothing reasons, journaling and that kind of thing. And then you matured as a writer, you got some perspective, and now you're in a place of advocacy and sharing, which is why you're with us today.
Yeah.
So I'm like putting big exclamation marks on recognizing those stages that you brought up in 15 minutes of conversation.
Oh, thanks.
I wonder if you could bring us through the writing practice that you brought for us today.
Yes, if I can have that up on the screen, I would appreciate it. Because I try not to move my screen around when I'm mid-Zoom. There we go. So yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about how I used to be a little bit of a angry comedian. Well, I'm trying to be a bit more positive in my 30s, and now that I'm a walking medical autoimmune disaster. So, as we say here in my quote, it's been a strange and tiring few years in the world, and I think a writing prompt can be a really nice way to remind ourselves of the joys we've experienced in our life. And so I wanted to ask, do you have a memory that you consider to be the happiest moment of your life? Can you picture it, play it like a movie in your mind, smell it, perhaps even taste it? Our senses ground us in our lives in a big way. And so I believe it's important, especially in memoir, to dig deep into our senses to help us carve out our stories. If you can, pick a sense you might not engage with as much as with others in your writing. For example, if you're the type of writer to describe a room or environment in great visual detail, try writing about what characters can hear or touch instead. Then write a scene of your happy memory with the sense you chose included as much as you can. And of course, if you're not in a place to let happiness in right now, because I've been there, please feel free to write about something that is knocking at the door of your mind that you've been afraid to let in. Open the door a crack and peek inside, then close it behind you when our 10 minutes are up. Take a breath, listen to yourself, and go. And you've got 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes.
It went by fast.
I
And it
know.
went by slow.
I
So
know.
yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Seth.